Okay, welcome everyone who's joining us on our final session, Building the Future We Want to See with UyenThi Tran Myhre. And we will be starting shortly. So we're just gonna let everyone get into the presentation. And welcome, we have quite a few people joining us. We are gonna leave or start a few minutes after the hour. Just wanted to let you know that. Just because we had so many people in the previous session, somebody might have taken a break. So we'll be starting in about 2 minutes with our presentation. Okay, so we will be starting here in just a moment. I just wanted to let everyone know that we will be taking questions from everyone who's attending, and we'll be looking at those towards the end of the session for UyenThi to answer. So if you have a question today for UyenThi, please put that in the chat area, and I'll be monitoring that for her and make sure that we answer as many of those as possible at the end of the session. So anytime during the session, if you have a question and you want to throw it in there, we can go ahead and queue that up. With that, we're going to go ahead and I'd like to introduce, whoops, if I can get my camera going here, there we go. Technology is working good. So I'd love to introduce UyenThi Tran Myhre. She is the Senior Director of Equity and Leadership Development at the Equity Innovation Center of Excellence, YMCA of the North. And for those of you who don't know what the YMCA of the North is, it's my old hometown. It's the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and kind of some of the surrounding area. So I love that up there. At the Equity Innovation Center of Excellence, again, she serves as the Director of Equity and Leadership Development. She received her master's in educational psychology from the University of Minnesota and her BA in journalism and a certificate in women's study from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's worked in diversity, equity, and inclusion settings for over 15 years, from AmeriCorps literacy and college access programs to serving as assistant director at the first campus-based women's center in the country at the U of M. UyenThi is also a contributing writer and editor at Project Yellow Dress, a storytelling platform that highlights the histories, voices, and experiences of the Southeast Asian diaspora. She believes in the power of narrative and storytelling to uplift voices and communities and to drive change to a better world. And I'd love to thank UyenThi for joining us today, and it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you to Lynn and to everybody who made this opportunity to join you possible today. I'm really excited to be joining you at the end of hopefully a really great virtual conference. As Mike said, I am joining you today from Minneapolis, Minnesota, Dakota land. I have been part of the YMCA for not quite 1 year. I started my role at the Y of the North in early March, 1 week before COVID changed everything, including my ability to join you here today. I'm really lucky that I've been able to continue working virtually since March. It has made getting to know my Y colleagues and the YMCA a little bit more tricky, but I have been able to make connections with the Y movement across Minnesota and the country because so much of our work is online now. Of course, obviously, I would rather be able to be with you in person in Florida, where I imagine it's really warm and sunny right now. It's definitely sunny up here in Minneapolis. There's no snow on the ground yet, but I'm mindful of I have a lot of layers. I have a heated blanket right now. I've got coffee and tea and water and all the beverages. And I know that this is the closing of your virtual conference. And so hopefully you've had a chance to grab some lunch or a beverage, whatever you need, move around as you need to, as you've been enjoying your conference. So thank you again for the invitation to be with you here today and spend some time with you sharing a bit of my story. And I'm excited to hopefully be able to do some Q&A and really just some conversation with you after I wrap up my remarks today. So 2020 has been a year of collective crisis with the double pandemic of COVID-19 and racial injustice. I know that so many of us are eager for the end of 2020, the new possibilities that we hope 2021 will bring. At the YMCA, we know that our journey to becoming a multicultural, anti-racist organization will continue into the new year and beyond. We know that community begins with us. What do we need to build the future that we want to see? I won't pretend to have all the answers for you here today, but again, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share some of the lessons I've learned about the necessity of finding community and making space for rest, joy, and imagination as we make the world better. To tell you that in my previous role at the Women's Center at the University of Minnesota, before joining the Y, I did event and conference planning, and I booked keynote speakers, but never did I imagine that I might be in this role myself one day, much less during a pandemic, and coming to you all virtually from across the country. I can't replicate the experience of being in an auditorium or a conference center together, but I thought it would be nice if you could have some visuals to go along with my talk today. So I'll be sharing some pictures throughout, partially also so you don't have to just look at my face this whole time. You'll have me and my story, but also some visuals to go along with it. I'm going to be starting today with a little bit of my own story and my family's story. Here is a picture of me and my parents and my big brother. We're at my parents' house in the suburbs of Minneapolis in the 80s. When I was a little girl, my mom used to tell me stories at night before bed. Sometimes they were American fairy tales, sometimes they were Vietnamese folk tales. Often they were stories of our family's life in Vietnam before the war and what it was like for my family to leave home. I grew up on these stories, but it hasn't been until the past few years that I've really been able to make sense of what it means for me to be the legacy of refugees. In her poem Home, British Somali poet Warsan Shire writes, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border, and you see the whole city running as well." I was born and raised in Minnesota, land of 10,000 lakes. Before I was born, my family lived in Florida for a month in the summer of 1975. They arrived on June 26th, having traveled over 10,000 miles from Saigon, Vietnam. If my family had stayed in Vietnam after the war officially ended, my father, like many South Vietnamese men, would have been forced to enter a re-education camp to learn about the ways of the new government. In reality, these camps were forced labor prisons. On April 29th, 1975, the day before Saigon surrendered, my family found passage on an oil rig that was leaving the harbor in Saigon. My uncle was a colonel in the South Vietnamese Army, and thanks to his connections, he was able to secure passage on this oil rig for 18 of the extended family. My parents, oldest siblings, my grandparents, and aunties and cousins on my dad's side of the family. After leaving the harbor in Saigon, carrying 300 refugees, the oil tanker traveled first to Singapore, and then for another 3 weeks to Hawaii. U.S. Air Force cargo plane carried the family to Guam, and then finally to the refugee camp at Eglin Air Force Base near Valparaiso, Florida. For this talk, I actually did some online research and I found some news stories and some photos from that time. I learned that Okaloosa County, Florida opened its arms to thousands of refugees from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia in 1975, including my family. Hundreds of local residents in Florida volunteered at this refugee camp. From my family's recollection, they stayed at the camp for about a month. There are churches all over the country who sent representatives to the camp to connect with refugees and set up sponsorships to help them find a new home in a new community here in the US. My family was lucky that all 18 of them were able to leave Vietnam together and stay together, and they hope to stay together in the US as well. Not all of the church sponsors were able to help a family as large as ours, but eventually a group of sponsors from a church in Minneapolis connected with the family, and they were able to help us relocate to Minnesota together. When the volunteers in Florida heard that our family would resettle in Minnesota, they warned us about the snow and the cold winters up here. And so before the family left, the Floridians made sure that we had warm clothing and winter jackets to prepare for the bitter weather. And whenever my mom gets to this part of this story and retelling the story of our journey to Florida, to Minnesota, she always really cracks up at this part because she remembers how when the family got to Minneapolis and they disembarked from the plane, they were bundled up from head to toe, but they didn't realize that the warm layers wouldn't be needed in July in Minnesota. I actually have a picture here of the family. It's a clipping from the Minneapolis Star newspaper from July 1975. The caption says, "Refugee family, one of the largest Vietnamese refugee families to be resettled in Minnesota, arrived in Minneapolis last night, sponsored by Mount Olivet Lutheran Church." When I see this picture, I'm reminded how my family's story is both similar to so many refugee experiences, but also how our story is really exceptional. Not every refugee family gets to stay together, and not all children are kept with their parents. The fact that my family escaped the day before Saigon fell, without my uncle's high-level connections, my father and the men in my family would have been separated for years from their spouses and children. To me, this is a really, really personal example that helps me think about the nuances of identity and diversity and even privilege, and how having privilege doesn't mean that a person or a family doesn't face struggle. I think my family was really lucky to leave when they did. We are also really privileged to have the right connections that so many refugees did not. In her poem Home, the British Somali poet Warsan Shire writes, "You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land." So I've told you about how my family arrived in Florida and then arrived in Minnesota. I'm going to fast forward to the present in this past year. In the spring, at the beginning of the pandemic, my siblings and I offered to run errands and pick up groceries for our elderly parents. I remember talking to my mom on the phone one day and offering to pick up groceries for her, making sure that she was safe, just checking in, making sure everything was okay. As we said goodbye in one of these phone calls, I reminded her to be mindful of her high blood pressure. It's like, "Mom, don't worry too much. Now I'm here for you. Whatever you need, let me take care of you. Just don't worry too much. You've got your high blood pressure to worry about." And she kind of laughed and she told me, "This doesn't frighten me. I was scared when we left, when we were on that oil rig. I was scared when it was just my body between your brothers and sisters in the ocean." I keep thinking of this conversation with my mom, especially in a year where there has been so much grief and loss and despair and anger and confusion. It's so easy to feel overwhelmed and hopeless. But reflecting on what she said, I began to wonder what it means to be resilient in the face of all of this. I've learned that resiliency isn't about ignoring or avoiding difficulty or stress, but rather resiliency is about our ability to navigate difficult, stressful times. And our resiliency is only strengthened when we navigate these times together in community. Our ability to be resilient, to navigate difficult, stressful times gets stronger when we take care of each other. I'm really humbled when I think about all of the right steps that had to happen over my family's story, my family's history. All of these steps that had to happen just exactly so for me to exist today, to be here today. I think of my uncle who used all his power to make sure that my family could stay together when they left home. I think of my aunts and my parents who used all their resourcefulness to make sure that the kids were fed and safe during the journey from Saigon to Eglin Air Force Base. I think of the community in Florida that opened their arms to my family and to so many thousands of refugees and helped them get on their feet. And I think of the church sponsors in Minneapolis who helped them find housing and English language courses and so much more. This past July was the 45th year since our family arrived in the United States. In answering the question, how do we build the future we want to see, I can look back at my own family's history for clues. 45 years ago, my family saw that war was ending, and my family had the luck, the connections, and the chance to choose a different future, one that allowed us to stay together, find community and neighbors who helped us get on our feet and put down roots in a new home. For the elders in my family who made sure that we had this chance, their vision for us kids was that they wanted us to get a good education. They wanted us to go to school, to go to college, to graduate, to find stable jobs, to one day have families of our own, and much of which has come true for many of my extended family members. Yet, while my family commemorated 45 years in Minnesota this past summer, we were and are still in the midst of a pandemic. Many of us are still here in Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered in May, sparking a national and global reckoning in the fight for racial justice and the movement for Black lives. In light of this, as we near the end of 2020, what opportunities can the new year bring us? How much will the turn of the year really help us when it feels like we have so much to do? When I begin to go down this rabbit hole of questions of doubt and anxiety and fear, it helps me to remember the fact that we didn't get into this moment of time overnight. And the fight for a multicultural, anti-racist organization, a multicultural, anti-racist, and equitable world, a world where everyone is thriving. I know that that won't be won overnight either, but we can also take small steps together to make the world better. A Detroit activist and philosopher. Her name was Grace Lee Boggs. She's passed away now, but over her lifetime, she was involved in the civil rights movement, Black Power movement, labor, environmental justice, and feminist movements over 70 years of her lifetime. She reminds us that the only way to survive is by taking care of one another. Here in Minneapolis, where I am coming to you from, as with the rest of the US, COVID-19 has laid bare the disparities that already existed in our low-income communities, in our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. We know that unequal access to housing and food has worsened since the pandemic began. And the systems that we have in place to address these needs are really overwhelmed. And many of our systems are creating more harm for those who have the least. In my community here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, I've seen how ordinary people have stepped in to address this need because we realize that mutual aid and taking care of each other is how we survive this. I've seen how volunteers here have coordinated efforts to support Minnesotans who are facing poverty, who are unsheltered and unhoused. And I know that there might be some stereotypes or misinformation out there about Minneapolis and about Minnesota that casts my city and my hometown as this dangerous or scary place to live. Not as often, though, I think, are there chances to see the stories of on the ground, the myriad ways our community is stepping up to support each other. We have examples here like Pimento Kitchen, a local restaurant, which has actually evolved into a relief organization this past summer and continuing now into the winter time and beyond. It's serving as a hub for basic supplies. They're collaborating with nonprofits to provide meals to young people who have less access to food because of distance learning during the pandemic. Another example within my own family, my cousin and her husband have organized the biking community here to collect and deliver basic supplies to the Y and to other collection points, donating everything from fresh vegetables and non-perishables to soap and diapers and more. My cousin started with bikes as a transportation method because during the uprisings here this summer, they found it was easier to get from neighborhood to neighborhood by bike. But since then, it's become a way to get enthusiastic cyclists from across the cities involved in supply drives to meet the ongoing need of individuals and families who are turning to nonprofit and community organized donation centers. And I look at my city and I look at this community and I look at the Y and beyond. I also see the different ways that social media is really serving as a platform to connect us all, especially in this virtual time. Seeing how people are turning to social media to coordinate these volunteer and community driven mutual aid efforts, whether it's getting the word out about supply runs and donation drives, asking for direct support for individuals or families who are housing or food insecure, or offering resources, whether that's time or financial resources, offering transportation to people who are in need. As I share these various examples, I'm really reminded of how similar they are to the ways that volunteers in Florida and in Minnesota supported my family when we first arrived here 45 years ago. Even with the language barrier and without the aid of a smartphone translation app back then, community members made sure that we got our basic needs met: clothing, food, shelter, transportation, language classes, healthcare, employment resources, and more. And with these needs met, my family began to dream about what might be possible. As the daughter of refugees, I can see now that we are provided support that should be available to everybody, but we know that that often isn't the case. When I set my family's story against the larger backdrop of 2020 and try to make sense of what should come next, I realize that it begins with us. When we look at the current world and refuse to accept it as it is, I realize that it begins when we have the imagination to take steps towards building a different world, one where all individuals, all communities have the support they need to not just survive, but thrive. My parents left Vietnam because they could not see a future there for themselves or their children. Because of them and everyone who supported them and made this future possible, this gave me the chance to have opportunities. And I want to take those opportunities I've been given to shape a world where not only is my own family thriving, but everyone is thriving. When we dream about building a future we want to see, how do we draw upon lessons learned from history, from previous struggles for justice? During this time of collective crisis, it is our responsibility to look at the root causes of systemic inequities, to understand where we've been and what we've tried before so we can forge new ground. Scholar and activist Angela Davis reminds us that the agents of history are not so much the leaders and the spokespeople, but rather the masses of people who develop a collective imagination regarding the possibility of a new future. It's not easy to imagine a new future, though, or new possibilities when we're exhausted or overworked. When we think of the new year and beyond, what do we want more of? How can we make space for rest and for joy so that there is room for vision and imagination to grow? I think we talk a lot about self-care as an answer to burnout culture. Self-care has become such a buzzword over the past several years, right? So self-care, so we can go find energy to come back and then burn out again and then repeat. But this framework really traps us in a survival mindset and it limits us from truly thriving. And when I think about making room for rest and joy, I think some of that can include your typical self-care ideas. It might be watching Parks and Rec for the millionth time if you're me, might be playing video games if you're me, having a spa day at home, whatever that looks like. It can be all of those things, but it's so much more than all of that as well. It's about understanding that we deserve to rest, that we deserve joy for our own sake, even within cultures and systems that want more and more and more of us all of the time. I Know when we're burning out and when everything feels awful, it might seem impossible to make space for rest and joy, but this just underscores why it is so necessary. And while I think this is another shift that's not going to immediately change overnight, we can begin practicing this in small ways, practicing making space for rest and joy. It could look like slowing down and being more realistic about work plans rather than just going through business as usual. It might look like saying no to something or someone so we can say yes to something else. It might be just something really simple like sending a text to a friend that says, "Hey, thinking of you today," and not really expecting a response. Maybe it's dropping off a meal for a loved one or scheduling a virtual dinner or happy hour with your oldest friends or your family. I've learned actually from friends that it's also rest and joy is also about um, asking for help to find rest, to find joy, and that it's okay to ask for it. It's not something that I've really comes naturally to me or something that I've really been good at, but I've seen how friends have modeled this for me, reaching out to me when they need support, and how fulfilling that is to be able to do that for each other and to know that I can ask for that from others as well. So all of this, reframing rest and joys in these ways of being in community with each other, finding rest and joy in community with each other, I think is helpful in staying grounded, because when we have community looking out for each other, we know that our resilience, our ability to navigate difficulty and stress just gets stronger. Whatever rest and joy looks like, it's about finding it for ourselves and creating space for others to experience it as well. And remembering that rest and joy is something that we are all worthy of. I think when we have time to rest and slow down, a question of where do we begin to build the future we want to see can become less daunting. When we have time for rest, we can understand that because there is so much work to do, that also means there's so many places for us to begin. We don't all have to be at 100% every single day to create this new world where everyone is thriving. We can help each other find ways to make a difference and take turns resting as well. It's about remembering that we don't always need to be at the center of a new initiative to create change, to create this new future, but we can support and amplify existing efforts to uplift those who are at the center of the issue. It's as individuals, it's really up to us to learn what strengths and skills and resources we have to offer and channeling that into action. And one by one, we know that our individual choices can add up to a collective force. One resource I want to share around this idea that's really been useful to me personally is this social change ecosystem created by Deepa Iyer for the Building Movement Project. Check it out when you have a chance. It's online, it's free. And what I like about it is it describes these different various roles for social change, from healers to storytellers, to caregivers, to frontline responders, to visionaries, and more. And for those of us like me who like reflection and prompt questions, the guide online includes this map, descriptions of all this, and reflection questions and more. So one thing I find really helpful about this map is that it helps me figure out where to begin when I'm feeling stuck. It helps me imagine the different strengths and roles that I have to play, the people around me, helping them think about what roles they have to play in creating social change. It reminds me that we don't all need to fill all of these roles all the time, nor should we. It can help us visualize the different roles we can play depending on the context and the situation. So maybe in a professional setting, we might be visionaries, helping the team think of new ways to look at a situation to tackle a problem. Maybe we're experimenters. We're the ones willing to try a new way of addressing an issue. But in a personal context, maybe we don't play those same roles. In a personal context, out in the community with our loved ones, neighbors, friends, family, it might be that we play a different role. Maybe instead of a visionary or experimenter or a weaver, maybe we play the role of caregiver, making sure that people have their needs met, bringing them a home cooked meal, giving them a ride to the doctor's appointment, whatever that might look like. When I consider that social change ecosystem map, and I think about the many people I've met over the last 6, 7, 8 months virtually here at the YMCA, out in the community, here in Minneapolis, I can see that we already have so many individuals filling these roles in various capacities. There are people working every day at the YMCA and beyond to make the world a better place, not just for the generation that comes after us, but for all of us here today as well. Right now, we have the chance to work across generations. There's a saying that I think of. The saying says that those who are closest to the problem are the closest to the solution, the furthest from power and resources. As we work towards becoming a multicultural, anti-racist organization, for those of us who are in positions of leadership, not only should we uplift the voices and efforts of those closest to the inequities we want to address, we can make room and material change to step aside and center and empower those who are most impacted. When I look back on these three lessons, the importance of community, the importance of creating space for rest and joy, and the importance of intentionality and how we fit into change-making efforts, I can see how much of my history and my future actually share. How even in vastly different circumstances, the work that we all have to do as human beings trying to make a kinder, more just, more life-affirming world doesn't change all that much, actually. And as many of you in this audience here today probably know, there's a difference between work and the work. And understanding that difference, especially in times of pandemic and uprising and upheaval, it isn't always easy. Again, I don't claim to have any or all of the answers for you, but here are a few questions that have been helpful to me based around those three main ideas I've shared today. Is the work we're doing truly for the community or with the community? Is the work being done in a way that benefits everyone involved? Or is it being done for the sake of keeping up with appearances? Or are we just doing it because it's always been done this way? Is the work we're doing all consuming, or are we building in time to slow down and actually reflect on the work, to stop and think about what we're doing, to rest and come at the work with a new and fresh perspective? Is the work striving to be all things to all people all the time? Or are we being intentional about what power we have, what access we have, what our values are, and how we can align all of those things? These are questions that I try to ask myself to help guide my own work, whether that's work or the community work I do outside of my job. But I also wonder what insights might be gained from asking these questions as a team, as a working group, or as an entire organization. Thank you again for this opportunity to join you here today. As I close, I'd like to leave you with some parting thoughts from writer and organizer Adrienne Maree Brown. We are bending the future together into something we have never experienced, a world where everyone experiences abundance, access, pleasure, human rights, dignity, freedom, transformative justice, peace. We long for this. We believe it is possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, UyenThi. Hopefully, we'll get some additional questions. I know we started with one, and then you answered it during your sharing. So thank you so much. I did have a question for you. So in your new role with the UyenThi of the North, you said I think you've been there just about a year. Are there an example of some of the work that you and your team have been doing in the community that perhaps you could share?
Yeah. So in my everyday role, I'm doing a lot of work at the Equity Innovation Center with external clients. And so some of the work that my team and I have been doing have been in the community in the Twin Cities, out in the wider Twin Cities area, from cities and suburbs, of everyday community members who are wanting to come into this work and really wondering, what can we do next about this racial injustice? And a lot of it I found is about just making space for community members from all walks of life, right? City leaders to educators to families, parents, young people as well, just to come together and ask those questions together and share anxiety and concern about, where are we going? What do we do next? How did we get here? And it's been such a rich experience to be able to slow down and be with people pretty much virtually in these times up here, but to be able to ask those questions and not be afraid to ask them, to ask, what don't we know about how did we get to where we are right now in 2020? And what are the different ways that we can fit in and plug in and start conversations around racial justice and the movement for Black lives and the role of various people in this work, whether it's in an education setting or folks who are working in nonprofits or corporate world or higher education. And I think at the end of the day, it's really been a little bit of sharing some ideas on history and helping people make connections around, understanding dimensions of identity and diversity and the history of the United States. And then also just making space for questions and helping people kind of draw those connections on their own and, be not necessarily in a safe space, but a brave space where they feel comfortable being uncomfortable, asking those questions and sharing answers. Um, Not even all the answers, right? Just sometimes it's these unanswered questions that even that they get put out there, I think sparks a lot of imagination and inspiration to go back to their everyday lives, their everyday work, and keep having those conversations, doing actually that work in their own areas, their spheres of influence. So
Thank you. It looks like we do have another question from Lynn Wilcox. What has been your biggest learning from your time with the Y?
yeah. Um, my biggest learning has been, that's such a great question. I feel like I have so many answers. Let me think about it. I think what I have learned is that being at the Y, there's so much power in the Y movement because there's so many. I've learned that it's like even for my first week of learning that the Y is not just like swim and gym and learning that that was a phrase that folks used to describe what the Y was. Like it's that and it's more, right? Like when I first got this job offer, to be honest, I was like, ooh, I'm really excited to join this Y. I'm going to go to the gym and maybe I can like become uh, I can take swimming lessons, right? Because I actually never learned to swim. Um, and I was thinking about all the different ways I could plug in, and that has just changed so much because of the pandemic. And I share that story to answer the ways that even in the Equity Innovation Center, where our work is around diversity and inclusion and equity, that there's pockets of people who are doing that work across the Y already. And I've learned that, I think part of my job is that how do I connect and learn from those folks who are doing that work in Beacons or Youth and Family Services, who are doing that work in like the swim and gym world and in the branches. And it's really about activating people who already care about this work every day and building up that capacity for everyone to do it because there's already that hunger there, that desire there. And I feel like it's such a big opportunity to just connect across a network that's already so strong of people, a lot of people I've learned who have just been at the WISE for many, 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 many years, right? And they have so much richness and offer, history to offer as far as like where has the Y been? Where is it going? What's been done so far? What ideas are there from people who've been at the Y already, right? And see like what the strengths are, what the opportunities are. And so what I've learned as like this new person coming in is that it's really kind of my job to just listen, maybe ask some questions and just learn really how can I uplift and amplify work that's already being done here, ideas that are already happening on the ground from people who've been here much longer than I have, who know the ins and the outs, right? And what those opportunities are. And I feel like I have so much more to learn because there's so much connection that can happen in this virtual space. And then I think so much more that's to come as well.
Another common question that we've had over the sessions is, and you mentioned that about your learning and how important that is. When you think about where you turn to hear other important voices, whether it's books or podcasts or other resources, where do you suggest or where do you turn?
Yeah. So I talked about social media earlier because I think it can be a blessing and a curse for sure. So I definitely turn to social media a lot because I'm not the kind of person that wants to get on social media and go viral or anything like that. But I find that it's so useful to just plug in and listen to different voices out there. When I think about what it means to kind of diversify the connections that you have, that can be like everyday connections, but to answer the question like the resources and where do I find different voices, I think social media. So some specific examples I can think of is a podcast called All My Relations. that uplifts. It's led by two Native women, Atika Wilbur and Adrian Keene, and they did a great episode actually last month around the idea of Thanksgiving and Thanksgiving and the true history of Thanksgiving. And that's one podcast where I think is an incredible way to learn about some different history and contemporary experiences of Indigenous peoples that we don't often get access to, right? I think other ways is just checking in with friends about like what books they've been reading. I know lots of folks have been reading some really great nonfiction, whether that's How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. But then I also think there's some amazing fiction books that have so much to teach us as well about kind of how did we get to where we are today. So I think maybe the last fiction book I read that has really stuck with me is called The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. And it tells this incredible story. And so if you're looking for something a little bit different, maybe some downtime with the holidays coming, highly recommend that as well. And I could go on, but I'll stop myself with that podcast and that book recommendation.
Well, I know that the delay is in the presentation, so we'd say last call for questions, and we'll give that about 30 to 45 seconds to resonate. You know, I wanted to thank you again for coming today and joining us. Not just this perspective that you have being associated with the Y and the initiatives that we're doing there, but also with what you've done over the last 15 years in the other organizations in the community, and sharing that in a way. I think that as I saw some of the comments, was really resonating with people as far as how do you begin and what does that look like? Because that's always the question, right? Is where do we start, and making it a little bit simpler for us to begin that for such a complex and just a big thing, right? So thank you for that, and don't see any additional questions. So other than a bunch of love what you're doing in the comments. And again, we hope you have a wonderful holiday. Again, thanks for joining us, and stay warm up there. Again, that's my my other home, my previous home up in the north. And when I go up there, I'm looking for the cold and the snow, and you're probably not so much.
We'll trade places someday, maybe.
Yeah, well, you've been here already, so you know what to be coming back to. So.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, Mike, and to Lynn for the invitation, and to every single one of you for the work that you're doing every day and showing up for the Y and for your community. So appreciate all that you do. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your conference.
Take care, UyenThi.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. And Jamie is going to be joining us here shortly. So I'm going to get started on a couple of things. I wanted to say again, thank you for joining us for this session. I would ask that you stay for just a few moments. We did want to share some things with you as we end up our first virtual conference. It's not our first conference, but the first virtual, and probably won't be our last. And maybe next year it's a hybrid. Hopefully we get to see each other in person. But the first thing I wanted to do is to say thank you. There are so many people that made this possible. First and foremost, it was our committee. And I would be remiss if I didn't really just throw out two people, Lily Tysinger and Scott Farney, who are invaluable with the Alliance, and were invaluable, especially in the last few days in taking this conference to the next level as far as making this platform work and getting us to be able to engage in this way. I know that technology is never perfect, and I appreciate how many people that did have little glitches, although there were not many, were able to understand that, work with us, help us figure some things out. So while we're on the platform, and while Jamie joins us, I wanted to share just real quick some of the fun things that everyone did and some winners in some of our contests. So I'm gonna share my screen, and this one. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to be able to share with you is, sorry, I just switched screens. were our contest winners. And so if you haven't been there, congratulations to Lily for our Motivation Monday contest winning. Our coffee selfie, Jane Martin, right? The giant coffee. Everyone loved that. Transformation Tuesday, Leslie Cook. Be kind, be patient, be generous, be accepting, be all of these things to yourself. That is where it begins. Our takeaways from the day. Lily won that one with, we have so many opportunities to work towards inclusion for all. It was great to hear from many of our speakers. Our decked out from low I is Stephanie Zaragoza. Checking out the very cool mask. It starts with us. Tatiana, love. I think that's a great one right there. And then inclusion from Jenna Starkey. We have actively been changing our mindsets to allow the community to tell us their needs rather than offering the programs we believe the community needs. We are incorporating constant feedback of the community needs, not just current programs and participants, and continuously recalibrating programs daily to serve the ever-changing needs of all. And then we had one entry in the coolest cup. Lily, kind of a common theme with Lily, she wins a lot and she's also the top of our leaderboard. So that's where I wanted to take you. Our leaderboard, Lily, because of all the work she's been doing in the platform, look at this, Tatiana right behind her, Derek, again, right behind them, and then you can see everyone else. So if you haven't checked out where you ended up on the leaderboard, and we are going to be sending some prize packages to our winners, not just Lily. We're going to go down that list a little bit from the YPN. And so again, thanks for participating in that. And again, thanks to our sponsors, and you still have time to visit them. I'm going to bring Jamie in now to bring in a couple more things to wrap up. Just know that you will be receiving an email shortly within the next day with some requests for some feedback. And just so that we make sure that everyone knows, one of those things that we're going to help you do is to get credit towards your certification for LCDC. So you will get credits for this, but you will have to fill out some information to do that. So in the survey, which you will get a link to a survey, there will be a place for you to put in the information if it's important to you to get your LCDC credits. If you don't do that in the survey, we won't know and we won't be able to report it, so it'll be up to you in that case. So good reason to fill out the survey to get those extra credits for your certification. So I turn it over to Jamie, and thank you again for coming to our conference.
Hello, thank you for joining our first virtual conference. We hope that you have enjoyed the last 2 days with us. Like Mike said, you are going to be receiving a survey from us in the next few days, so please give us your feedback. Also on that survey, if you're interested in becoming a part of the committee or a YPN board member, there is a way to let us know there. You can also like our YPN Chapter 27 Facebook page, or go to ypn@floridaymcas.org to let us know. So before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank all of you that are still on the call watching for your continued support in your Y and your communities over this last year. You have done some great work and you should be very proud of yourself. So thank you for your work this last year. So again, thank you to the conference committee. They've been working over the last several months, getting us this great agenda, our keynote speakers, the platform. So thank you. Thank you to Mike, to Scott and Lily, helping all of us that are challenged with technology over the last couple days, navigating us through this platform. Thank you to our peer community leaders that have helped us out. Thank you to the Alliance and our CEOs. Lastly, thank you for the support from our sponsors, because without your support, this would have not been a success. I'm sorry. So again, thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you next year in 2021.